Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. You've heard of the TV show The Apprentice. You may very well hear about a movie of the same name. They are not at all similar, although the central character is. The central character in the movie The Apprentice is someone you're very familiar with, former President Trump. The Apprentice is directed by Ali Abbasi. He is our special guest this week. Ali joins us from New York via Zoom. Ali, great to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I've seen in a couple of your interviews that you've described this movie as rigorous, fact-checked, and fact-based. Why?
Well, that's where you start, when you're working with real people, real characters, and basing a movie on that. I think you have a moral obligation to be thorough and to try to, not to distort realities, not to sort of, use the incidents of their lives as you please. Although you have to make some dramatic choices, obviously, you're telling a story. That doesn't necessarily make the movie a better movie, but that's a good start. Having it fact-checked and be fact-based is a good start for what we're doing.
It is in no way a documentary, though.
Not at all. And I think that's important to say. Neither it's really a Trump movie. So I don't think people should expect to see a biopic of him and seeing him growing up and riding horses or, doing whatever he did and going to different schools. This is a very specific thing, which is about his really formative relationship with Roy Cohn, a famous lawyer / fixer in 60s, 70s, 80s in New York, and how through Roy's mentorship he became the person we know him as today.
Would it be fair from your point of view, Ali Abbasi, to describe this as a buddy movie with also a sort of Frankenstein narrative?
Yeah, I mean, you can also call it a buddy movie for two villains, in a way. Although I don't, I've been fighting some of my liberal friends not to vilify him, not to make him a monster. Obviously he goes through that transformation, losing some of his humanity, sort of, learning from Roy how to manipulate the power system. But at the same time, the mission statement for us has always been to portray him and Roy and Ivana and all those very colorful, big, large-life characters as human beings. I think that's the really important thing.
And the source material, there are things referenced in the movie that you can find in court cases, you can find in books. What were the various sources of information that framed the facts that you brought to life dramatically in the film?
So my co-writer, Gabe Sherman, who's initiated the project as well, he, as you might know, he's a political journalist.
I know Gabe very well.
So yeah, and part of his job has been doing this rigorous fact checking. He knows these people. He have talked to Mr. Trump, many times. He covered his campaign, and frankly, like, I think a lot of the fact checking that has been done is done by him. Obviously, I tried also to do my own research as well. But between what he's done and what I could find and the review by our legal team, we feel good about this being fair representation. Now, a fair representation doesn't mean we're not critical, but it means we're fair. That's how we feel about it.
There's a very dramatic scene in the movie of an interaction between Trump and his then wife, Ivana. It is a violent sexual scene. I believe the source material from that is something that was in a divorce filing that Ivana represented in a deposition.
That's right.
Many years later, she recharacterized that and said any reference to rape was unfortunate, and that's not how she remembers it. What was the important, dramatic decision you made and Gabe made to include that in the movie?
So in between those two things you mentioned, Ivana going, her deposition going, on record under oath, and her completely denying it later on when Ms. Trump, I think, running for president, it was the first time. She also wrote her memoir, and in that memoir, the whole account is there again, and it's detailed, and it's even to detail, like allegedly he tried to pull her hair out. And then at the end of that memoir, there's this disclaimer, which is, well, I know I said all this, but I didn't mean it in the literal criminal sense. I didn't mean rape in the literal criminal sense. Now, if you look at it from journalistic perspective, you go, she had all the possibilities of retracting it first time or second time, or not talking about it, or not continuing with it. So we feel that there's absolutely something there. And also there's a precedence. Ms. Trump is convicted, as much as I know, in civil court for sexual assault on an unrelated case.
Right.
So this is a person who has a history of this kind of behavior. It's not out of thin air. But going back to the movie, this all would not have been interesting for us if it wasn't interesting for the story. And the reason it's interesting for the story is we're following sort of the whole rise of Donald Trump as this political figure, and how he gets where he gets, and we, to get to the human being of him, we follow those very close relations he had, with Roy, with his father, and also one of the really important one is with Ivana. So that scene and that whole thing is a big turning point in their relationship with the character. So that's why I think it's really important to include that, no matter how controversial it is or not.
For whatever my opinion might be worth, I think the value of that scene is what is the triggering precursor to this act of violence. Ivana insults Trump about his hair, pierces a kind of vanity that triggers with him an explosive emotional and physical reaction. To me, that's the centerpiece of that scene.
That's right. And it's also about a sort of power balance, because I think from what I could read, a lot of the tension in later in their marriage between Ms. Trump and Ivana was about this power balance, that he felt that she has become too much of a powerful executive, and almost is like sort of overshadowing him. And I think that aspect is also equally important. Again, this is we're dealing with them as characters and as human beings, and not much as two celebrities who have problems and business issues and whatnot. And that part is important for us.
And I'm fascinated that the movie begins with a reference to the Nixon presidency.
That's right.
And I've often thought that one of the things that Donald Trump concluded about Nixon is that he never should have resigned, and then he should have used Roy Cohn's tactics, and that if he was ever going to do anything in politics, he would be tougher and meaner than even Nixon.
Right. And you might, consider if President Nixon would have used Roy Cohn tactics, that would have probably changed the course of American history. I mean, he probably would have been capable of doing some sort of, and I think it would probably be unthinkable for a President Trump in that situation to take the same road, in my opinion, at least. But I think, there are a few things here. Number one, there is this notion that, you've had good presidents and bad presidents, which might be true. I'm not that familiar with the inner working of U.S. politics to go into that debate, but there is.
Let me stop you right there before you go on, because I don't want to cut you off farther, because we have to hit a break. Let me take this break. We'll pick up that line of conversation right when we come back. Segment 2 of the Takeout, our guest, Ali Abbasi, the movie, The Apprentice.
If you look at the party affiliations, Fred Trump, his dad was a lifelong Democrat. Ms. Trump was a Democrat until he wasn't a Democrat. Roy Cohn was a Democrat.
Listen, Judy, about 100 reporters were crawling up to get this interview, and I gave you the exclusive. New York Times.
Yes, hello, Judy. This is Donald Trump. I'm very excited to talk to you.
Be excited.
Donald, now that the lawsuit is behind you, what do you want to do next?
Well, I intend to acquire the Commodore, and I'm planning on making it the best and the finest building in the city, maybe the country, in the world. Judy, in the world, it's going to be the finest building in the world. It's going to be a spectacular hotel, absolutely spectacular, first class, and
That sounds very ambitious. Where do you get the drive? You're still so young, Donald.
I got flair and I'm smart, so I think that's going to make me successful. But I also want to stay humble.
Sorry, Judy. Listen, let's do the rest in person and bring a photographer, okay?
Sorry, all right.
No, I mean, listen,
Caught
it's
me
your
off
life. You got a ways to go, but you're learning.
Welcome back to the Takeout. That a clip from the movie The Apprentice. We have the director Ali Abbasi with us. Ali, we're talking about aspects of the American presidency, good and bad. Please continue.
Yeah, so as we're talking, I don't want to go too much into the like a political weeds of who was a good and who was a bad president and so on and so forth, but the precedence of U.S. presidents saying one thing in the public and then doing something else completely, that didn't start with Mr. Trump. And also there is a sort of a line from for if you're looking for the genealogy of American populist American rights, there's a genealogy, like it would sort of arguably could go draw a line from McCarthy through Roy Cohn,
Yep.
And going to Nixon, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, to Reagan, and then over to Mr. Trump. And I think that was also part of this lineage in a way. It's sort of a big point there.
I want to throw a theory at you about Trump and about the 70s, because that's where the movie starts.
That's right.
And I'd like to get your thoughts on it. It was always my theory, and I covered, whether you know this or not, 16 months of the Trump campaign from midsummer 2015 all the way through 2016, and then the first 3 years of his presidency.
Right.
But while I was covering Trump and the contrast with Hillary Clinton, I came to a theory that goes something like this. Donald Trump looked at the mid-70s and late 70s in America and said, this is when everything went to hell. Hillary Clinton looked at the 70s, mid-70s and late 1970s and said, this is when things started to turn the corner in a positive direction. That is to say, in the 70s, America was humbled by Vietnam, by Watergate, by oil shocks. Trump thought that was all horrible. There was a rise of gay rights. There was a rise of feminist rights, people of color. Trump was jarred and dislodged by all of that. Hillary looked at all that and said, this is where things are turning in our direction. Things are better. And the subtext of the whole 2016 election was, were you happy with what happened in the mid to late 70s? Or were you angry about what happened in the mid to late 70s? Trump represented anger. Hillary represented faith and confidence and optimism. And that was sort of a subtext of everything. And I felt when I watched the first part of the movie, I was seeing a kind of replay of that.
Oh, that's very interesting. And,
you don't mean that in a British way, do you?
No, I don't. Well, I mean,
you know what I mean by that.
No, I do find it interesting also because, Trump, rise comes in the 70s, in through that sort of very apocalyptic landscape of New York at the time where things were going really, really bad.
Right.
And I think the sort of the whole identity of Donald Trump as a successful businessman is hinged upon, his ability to sort of rise out of this rubble, and to present a different vision and to present a new way forward, which sort of, then sort of, got its way into the yuppie period in the 80s. So ideologically, I definitely think that, you can absolutely go there and there's always been that contrast for him, I think. But also there is a sort of a interesting sort of masculine or wannabe masculine way of seeing the world and the politics is like, like, back in that time, we were like, debating if we want to be a real men or not. And then the women came, and then the gays came. And in the 80s, we went back, we're like Arnold and
Terminator.
And bodybuilders, and the sort of over the top masculinity. That was the time. That was the message, and
Rambo.
that's what you sort of. That's right. You need Rambo in the White House to win again. Because the Soviets are so tough, and because the Japanese are so tough. At the time, it was Japanese. Now it's Chinese.
Right.
So yeah, I think you're right in that. Absolutely. But it's also interesting because I don't think you can be that black and white with Mr. Trump. I mean, if you look at the party affiliations, Fred Trump, his dad was a lifelong Democrat. Mr. Trump was a Democrat until he wasn't a Democrat. Roy Cohn was a Democrat. So, and you can't be part of the Democratic Party if you like dismiss up all their values. I mean, there was a time, if I'm not wrong, I think Mr. Trump was pro-abortion, pretty much.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very much so.
Yeah. So, I don't think you should take his values very, very seriously,
And for my audience, because this is a podcast, it's also a radio show, it's a streaming TV show.
Right.
It trends younger. Not everyone in my audience has any idea who Roy Cohn was. Help them understand, because he's a significant figure, a malevolent figure, a dastardly figure in many respects, but an important one.
Yeah, no, I think I'm the right person, because I didn't know anything about Roy either when we started, working on the script. And, when I read the script, like the first version that Gabe wrote, I was very, interested in figuring out like who this guy, who he is and how he became this person. And it's like a multi-layered guy. He was a sort of a legal genius, coming out of Columbia Law. He was in early 20s, joined McCarthy's legal team, became his right-hand man in the whole McCarthyism. And then after that, he came to New York and started his own law practice, which was more about sort of becoming a socialite and fixer than actually as it famously is also in the movie. His famous saying was like, "Don't tell me what the law is, tell me who the judge is."
Right.
And and he has this like big book of favors that he would do a favor for a client, and that client would do another favor for another client. He was good friends with President Nixon. He was good friends with the Catholic Archbishop of New York. He was good friends with like a lot of millionaires and celebrities.
Nancy Reagan.
And he was at the time, I think, allegedly representing 5 mob families in New York at the same time.
Right.
So and also wanted to add that as dangerous he was and as corrupt he was also a guy who could recite existential poetry from 1,000 years ago, from Persian poetry, from Omar Khayyam. He was interested in Broadway. He was a cultured person. He was sort of an anti-intellectual in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and famously, a homophobic, closeted gay, and so forth. So a very complex, interesting figure.
And played ruthlessly in the movie by your actor,
Jeremy Strong.
Yes. From another show we are all familiar with, and trust me, he's much more intense and malevolent in this show than that other one named Secession. Back with Ali Abbasi, our guest for the Takeout segment 3, coming your way in just a second.
It's not about who's good and who's bad, who takes a high road, who takes a low road. It's about winning.
Welcome back to the Takeout, the movie The Apprentice, the director, Ali Abbasi. Ali, there's a great scene in the movie where Trump doesn't recognize Andy Warhol. And Andy Warhol says, making money is an art. And Trump says, yeah, it is. And I found that to be a delightful collision of worlds that Trump didn't even know were actually colliding. Talk to me about that, and the sort of awakening that Trump goes through in this movie, not knowing his way around, but getting invited to places because of Roy Cohn, and then rising up in that world?
I mean, in a way, that's not incidental. I think that in a way, Mr. Trump is sort of Andy Warhol of the politics, or American politics at least, because what Andy did so successfully and beautifully on a conceptual level was he sort of devoided art of its own traditional values, and like sort of created a whole new set of values, which was like basically, if it works for me, if it sells, then it's art, and if it's a $2 million piece, it's great. If it's $10 million piece, it's a masterpiece. If it's $100 million, it must be the world heritage, and when you create that value, that's sort of, if you want to break down what young Donald learns from Roy, that's what it really boils down to, that you create whatever value or reality you need for yourself to succeed. If that value is out there, you take it. If it's not out there, you project it, you create it. And there is a realism in them meeting, because as you know, Warhol was also represented by Roy Cohn. So
Right.
I don't think it would have been, and like they had there are some famous photos of them, I don't know if they are together, but in Studio 54 at least they were hanging out in the same places. Generally speaking, I think one of the things that Roy Cohn did for young Donald Trump was to give him this sort of socialite, creme de la creme connections that he might not have had, because their family were extremely wealthy and they had a lot of property in Brooklyn, Queens, but they were also Brooklyn, Queens people. Mm-hmm. And sort of he brought all this, like, old money, Manhattan, that kind of connections to him. And, in his own way, because what I do love about these characters is that they're both punk rock. They don't follow a rule book. I mean, Roy could go to Republican donor party in like tight leather pants and a boy toy and a crown,
Right.
It's very conservative places.
Roy taught Donald Trump early in the movie his 3 rules: attack, attack, attack. That's rule 1. Rule 2, admit nothing, deny everything. Rule 3, never admit defeat. And I just want to spend a moment on this, because Roy Cohn in the 50s in our country with Senator McCarthy chased people he alleged to have been communists. In many respects, they weren't, but the allegations spewed forth with a kind of ferocity that made them seem real. People's lives and careers were destroyed. Separately from that, he also hunted down in Washington with conspiratorial language anyone who was gay. In fact, then President Eisenhower signed an executive order under political pressure generated by Senator McCarthy and Roy Cohn to ban all homosexuals from federal civil servants.
That was the Lavender Scare.
And many people in that Lavender Scare committed suicide over fear of being outed.
That's
so we're
right.
talking about the use and abuse of power at a startling scale in the 50s. And Roy was unapologetic about that his entire life. And so when we talk about these handing off of lessons to Trump, that's one of the things we're talking about.
Absolutely. I think, again, back to this sort of, taking all the principles out, I think what Roy did and what he taught Mr. Trump is to demoralize politics, to take the moral and ethics out of it and makes it a sort of a contact sport, Mm-hmm. It's not about, who's good and who's bad, who takes the high road, who takes the low road. It's about winning. And when you look at the American politics, there is a reason that he said that. If you look at the last debate, for example, between Ms. Trump and Ms. Harris, a lot of people, your colleagues, commentators, were talking about it. Almost no one was talking about what they said. Everyone was talking about who won and by how much.
Right.
It was as if there are 2 NFL teams. So I think in a way, it's, again, as a filmmaker, my instinct is it's easy to blame these people as being malicious and like lacking morals, but you can also turn around and say there is a system in place and they just are very good at using that system. They didn't create that system, but they're very good at it, and the system never stopped them. Not in the 50s, not in the 60s, not in the 70s, not in the 80s, and it sort of continued. And if you're Mr. Trump and you've seen all this, you go, this man got away with everything. Why couldn't I?
Why couldn't I? Exactly. A couple of lines that also stick out to me in the movie. Truth is a fiction. All is winning. Create your own reality. We live in those times right now.
Yes, and I think that is a very, very important thing, because, again, as a filmmaker, as an artist, I'm looking at this conceptually, and I feel like Trump as a president is a sort of a product and a symbol of a broken reality that we're finding ourselves in. The kind of broken reality where, I don't know if you remember this, but when Joe Biden was still running, there was a time where there were a lot of videos of him surfacing. He looked demented. He looked very old. And at some point, like, I'm dealing with these things. This is my job. I'm using all this technology. I'm like sort of, in a way, expert to seeing what's correct, what's real, what's not. I was completely disorientated at some point. I don't know what's true, what's not, who's manipulating, who's not manipulating. And if you look at social media and the way we're presenting a truth or reality, our grasp of reality is completely slipped, and the reality is whatever the most people like on social media. And I think that is an interesting aspect and the context for all this is happening, I think.
And that creates a space where effective branding can overvalue or can define truth.
Absolutely. And I think Mr. Trump, as you can, you can't probably see it clearly, but as I'm staying in his hotel, in his honor,
in New York.
In New York, I also want to have a piece of him. But it's interesting. It's a completely unremarkable place. It's pretty ugly, and the only reason people come here is because he has his name on it. And I think that branding is so strong. He's been working on it for like half a century. So no wonder that he wants to protect the Trump brand.
It is a bit ironic doing this show from a room. Which hotel, by the way?
I'm at Columbus Circle, Trump
Right.
International. I feel like I'm international, so I should stay in the Trump International. So that makes a lot of sense.
That's right. We only have 30 seconds, so I want you to start this. We'll pick it up on the other side of the break. Tell my audience a little bit about your own biography and why you were attached and wanted to be attached to this project.
I'm born and raised in Iran. So like I have an interesting, relationship to US in that way. We were an American colony basically until 1979, and then we became like the arch enemy of the United States in a way. And then anyways, I came out of Iran when I was in my 1920s, and I went to Europe. I studied architecture and philosophy and sociology, all sorts of things. Then
we'll stop it right there. We'll stop it right there. Architecture, sociology, philosophy. We'll pick it up on the other side of the break. I made you Garrett segment for the Takeout in 1 second.
It felt good, but then that didn't last long because we got a cease and desist letter from Mr. Trump's camp.
Welcome back to Takeout. Ali Abbasi is our special guest, director of the movie The Apprentice. You're in your early 20s. Carry it away.
Yeah, so I went to Europe in my early 20s and I studied different things. I studied literature and philosophy and sociology, and then I settled for architecture, and that didn't last long either. So I ended up in a film school and making movies. So in a way, you can see that I am the outsider here. Of course, I've been interested in U.S. politics and being looking at it, studying it, but my perspective, and I think my sort of point of view and the point of me being in a project is that I bring that outsider perspective. I'm not affiliated with parties. I'm not liberal or conservative on that scale necessarily, and I look at this as human beings. And I think that was the thing. That was one of the things I think that was very key for having me attached to the project, because this is a very contentious project. These are very polarizing figures, and you could argue that almost any other any American director would have difficult time selling that they're non-partial. So I think that gave me and of course I that is also my handicap in a way, because I need to I haven't experienced living in New York in 70s and 80s, so I need to sort of study it and analyze it and put it together.
Talk to me about the difficulties in getting this movie distributed and fully funded.
Well, like they say, when you want to criticize or critique or investigate a powerful figure in U.S., you have to have another powerful figure paying for it. Sadly
Straight
for
up.
us, sadly for us, we didn't have that powerful figure who was happy to pay for a non-partial movie. We pitched it obviously to different investors. We found an investor in our former investors, Kinematics, who were in the beginning very supportive and wanted to take risk and do the movie. And I think several things happened, and probably the most important thing that happened was that as we were making the movie, as we were putting everything together, Mr. Trump went from a disgraced former president that nobody would take seriously to on his way to becoming the most powerful person on earth again. And I think that scared the shit out of everyone. Yep. Our investors, distributors, whatnot. And if that wasn't enough, when we had the movie premiere and open in Cannes to generally positive, feedback.
8-minute standing ovation, as I read.
Yeah, it felt good in the room. It's like they didn't throw eggs at us.
That's not bad.
Yeah, no, it felt good, but then that didn't last long, because we got a cease and desist letter from Mr. Trump's camp saying that this is this rubbish is you're trying to interfere in the election and getting paid by foreign governments, which is basically how you finance a movie internationally. You get funding from different institutes. But yeah, so and that, I think the most important thing, that damaging thing it did, on top of scaring us, it scared all the potential distributors. So we had very difficult time finding a distributor. That then finally Briarcliff, who were like possibly the only people with the balls enough to go get into this, they came in and they they are lifting us, and I'm very grateful for them. And I think the American people should be grateful to these guys, because they're taking a chance.
So you mentioned you studied literature, you studied some philosophy. Talk to me about, from your perspective, the importance historically for humankind to have strong men around them or to lead them.
I think this comes, there is a certain trend, you can see it in history. Going back to 1920s, one of the reasons that Hitler's rise was so fast and so patriotic, so strong, was the fact that there was a lot of chaos, there was a lot of bitterness, there was a lot of frustration, there was a lot of new things that happening technologically, and that
Hitler, Mussolini, Tojo, not alone.
Yeah, you name it. That sort of fundamental uncertainty that is both technological, social, economical, and usually they go hand in hand, right?
Right.
That is fertile ground for people to say, I can't take it anymore. I don't want to see the grayscale of everything, and I don't want to hear everything is relative and everyone's right, and we have to be human beings and empathy for all each other. I just want you to tell me what to do. I just want to say what's wrong and what's right. And in that situation, in that context, you have the fertile ground for the strongman to come and say, forget about dishonest media, forget about everything, forget about this. Everyone is corrupt. You know, this is a swamp. We're gonna drain it. We're gonna clean it. We're gonna draw a wall around it, and it's gonna be beautiful and it's gonna be clear. And I think that's where we are.
So the 1920s, coming out of all of the disruption of the industrial age, the Gilded Age, concentrations of wealth. That's another thing that ran through those 40 years. Very similar to the digital age, economically disruptive, culturally disruptive, technologically disruptive, and massive concentrations of wealth.
Yeah, and I think arguably the same feeling that the sort of the common German person had after the First World War, which was, we lost the war and we got screwed and nobody cares about us and the government doesn't care about us, and now whatever foreigners and Jews and everyone else is taking over, and the sort of this sort of nativist thing. I think the nativist thing was not only in Germany, it went to catastrophic lengths, obviously in Germany, but even at the time, like some of the policies in the US, some of the sort of the political inclinations in France, and so I think it's bigger than the moment we're living in. It's bigger than Mr. Trump. It's bigger than MAGA. It is a global thing, and it is a sort of a global fertile ground for eroding democracy all around the world, unfortunately.
45 seconds, Ali Abbasi. Is this a pro-Trump or anti-Trump movie?
I think I can tell you this much. If you love Donald Trump, this is a movie for you. If you hate Donald Trump, this is also a movie for you. Just like Barbie.
And not nearly as long as Oppenheimer. Let's just be clear, okay? Not nearly as long as Oppenheimer. Ali Abbasi, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I want the audience to stay around for the Takeout Outtake Especial. We'll continue our conversation with Ali Abbasi. The movie, again, The Apprentice. He described some of the difficulties getting it distributed. It's now distributed. You'll be able to see it, enjoy it. Ali Abbasi, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
See you next week, folks. Stay tuned for your Takeout Outtake Especial.
When I have a lot of time on my hand and I want to really listen to music, not just like jog or whatever, I always somehow go for jazz.
Welcome to your Takeout Outtake Especial. I am Major Garrett. You already knew that. Ali Abbasi is our guest. The movie, The Apprentice. Ali, we do this with a lot of our guests, and I think this will be a lot of fun with you. We ask them the same three questions. You take them in whichever order you prefer.
And they're going to put me on the spot.
Yes, putting you on the spot, joyously so. Most influential book in your life and why? And because you're a filmmaker, I really want to know the answer to this. One of your all-time favorite movies. And if you're on a long flight or a long drive and you're going to listen to some music and you're really going to enjoy it, what kind of artist or genre is that most likely to be?
I think when I have a lot of time on my hand and I want to really listen to music, not just like jog or whatever, I always somehow go for jazz.
I could not agree more.
Yeah, and I can't tell you why. I can't tell you like I have a like a specific sort of taste or reason or historical reason, but I feel like that's the best kind of music for me to follow a flow of thought or a flow of being. So yeah, it would be I have a lot of jazz playlists. I do. In terms of movies, it's a difficult one for a filmmaker.
Sure, of course.
But but there were movies that sort of changed my mind about movies. And when I was a teenager, I used to write, and I published stories and whatnot, and I felt that movies were for like masses. They were for stupid people, and literature was for smart people like myself. At the time, I was a bit arrogant.
Yes, a not
but-
atypical conceit. Yes,
Exactly. But then I saw La Strada, which is a Fellini movie, and that definitely changed my mind. I saw Fanny and Alexander by Ingmar Bergman.
Yep.
And I saw The Clockwork Orange, or maybe A Clockwork Orange, by Stanley Kubrick, and I think that trio definitely changed my mind about everything with the movies. It did.
And deservedly so. One of the most influential books in your life, and why?
I think it must be 1001 Nights. I'm one of the few people who actually have read that whole thing.
Right.
Because
more commonly known as the Arabian Nights. Yeah.
That's right. And it is a masterpiece of storytelling. There are convoluted stories within a story, within a story, within a story. There's a frame, there's all sorts of things. There's sex, drugs, rock and roll, there's philosophy, there's politics. I mean, it is a gold mine. And if you are in any way or shape or form interested in stories and dreams and narratives, that you can't miss that one.
I think if you're answering that question, One Book on a Desert Island, you would be hard pressed to improve upon that answer.
Yeah, it would. I mean, you will survive for a while on that.
Ali Abbasi, it's been a great pleasure. Thanks so much for your time, and good luck with everything.
Thank you.